Wuthering Waves is a game where everything is acoustic. Birthmarks are the source of supernatural abilities, and a character's stats are augmented by monsters stored in your pocket. Gourd. That is also a glider. In this title, you play as John Waves, who has two siblings named Spirit and Opportunity. Your job is to fight the monsters that would destroy humanity. Discord. It is also a game made by the same people who made a different gacha game that's about penalizing ravens because they're too gray or something. So join me as I tell you the tale of this game, and discuss the harsh reality facing Wuthering Waves. The game starts with a cutscene depicting what I can only assume is an off-brand Cocoon of Finality from Honkai Impact 3rd, and then the main character gets awoken through the power of handholding. With absolutely no other context to explain what the heck is going on, we get catapulted through a wormhole and then land in water. That is in the air, and then we black out again apparently. None of this is ever touched on after this point. It's basically just an excuse to insert you as yet another semi-mute protagonist with amnesia. Seriously, can we knock it off with this trope already? It's so overdone. You're immediately picked up by Yang Yang and Shishia, who then begin info dumping at you as the game takes you through a tutorial sequence. Along the way, you see this cool dragon statue that triggers a brief flashback. Apparently this is the local region's god or something. Anyhow, the three of you make your way over to Baiji, who is the best starter character simply by virtue of being a healer, meaning she won't get immediately dumpstered the moment you have a proper DPS character, although this could just be my bias showing. Suddenly, a monster appears so the second combat tutorial can begin. And I'm gonna be real here, they really should have kept the intro cutscene from the beta version of the game for this part. In the launch version of the game, the Crownless just kinda shows up and you sword clash and then the fight starts. But the beta version is a proper setup where the Crownless actually seems like a threat, and saving the starter trio from him would have served as a solid foundation for their relationship for the story moving forward. Not to mention it would have made the rover absorbing the Crownless without a gourd seem actually impressive. As is in the release version, the loss of this crucial context makes the entire encounter completely forgettable. In general, the negative side effects of the massive last-second revisions they made to the story can be felt through pretty much all of the main story quests. It feels like they stripped out the things that made the game's setting unique in favor of a safer, by-the-numbers plotline. The next major segment is basically you going to the nearby capital city, only for the area's chief magistrate to announce citywide that she's expecting a special guest.
I've come to make an announcement. Shadow the Hedgehog's a bitch motherfucker.
But for some reason, she also just so happens to be out of town for the next 3 days. In the meantime, here's a riddle she left behind for the main character. It all turns out to be a ruse to lure out one of the main leaders of the bad guy group into a trap. But I'd like to take a moment to point out that at this point, the magistrate's plan was to fake her absence, leave behind a cryptic message for someone with amnesia that not only involves an intricate puzzle mechanism, but requires intimate knowledge of the region's history, and for the recipient to notice that the puzzle solution also points to a second, alternate secret meeting place so that she can then arrange the details of the trap that they're going to set ahead of time, instead of just meeting with the character conventionally and then taking them to the secret meeting place right off the bat. Somehow Scar is tailing the main character so as to try and convert them to their side, except the one evening where Rover meets with the magistrate in secret, but still knows about the original secret meeting in the vault the next day? While I will admit the alternate solution to the puzzle was quite clever, even though I noticed it pretty much immediately, none of this makes any sense once you think about it for longer than 5 seconds. Anyhow, then it's time to hype up the first limited 5-star DPS character, so you go north and then fight the monsters until you go inside a giant statue of an even bigger, badder monster, and then beat them up until the day is saved. While this climax was certainly entertaining and fun, and I quite like the team-up sequence leading up to it, it's still basic as all get out when it comes to fantasy plotlines. In general, this entire first region being a very obvious fantasy China region feels really played out, and in some ways, almost painfully generic for gacha games at this point. Still, at least it only took until halfway through the first major story arc for things to get interesting instead of 1.5 story arcs. Genshin. The 1.1 update's main storyline takes you to a mysterious island where time itself has gone awry, and you have to team up with Magistrate Jinchi and her teacher Changli in order to resolve the crisis before the entire world becomes frozen in time.
So you see, that's where the trouble began. That smile. That smile.
As it turns out, the local god has control over the flow of time itself, but it's mortally wounded and has only been stalling out its death so it can find a proper successor. And after a climactic battle, Jinchi manages to lay claim to that mantle. We also find out that the rover was at some point known as the Lord Arbiter, and the dragon was subordinate to them at some point. In fact, the rover was a legendary figure in history at some point until they disappeared for some reason. While intriguing, I honestly don't care all that much because at this point the rover is only one step removed from being your stereotypical overpowered isekai protagonist, which is just an absolutely overused trope. The game's writing is far better in the individual story quests, such as Yinlin and the exploration of grief and the inability to let go of those who have passed on, or Changli and her struggle to find purpose.
一度教えたわよね。誰も信用してはいけないって。
The 1.2 update story was mainly a filler arc with the obligatory Chinese New Year equivalent, but hey, at least we got a free 5-star DPS out of it who is actually meta. 1.3 gave us the Shorekeeper and the Black Shores, and dadgummit, what is it with open world gacha games and having absolutely gorgeous underground areas? And Kai no Miya, my beloved. Anyhow, this part of the story has us fighting the corruption of the Tethys system, a massive supercomputer used to predict upcoming disasters related to the Lament, which is the apocalyptic event that has quite literally reshaped the entire world on a fundamental level. It's here that we find out that the Lament has changed all known laws of physics, to the point where gravity is the only one that has remained the same. We also learn that the rover has been going through an endless cycle of guiding the development of civilization on this world for countless eons, only for the Lament to destroy it. And their recent memory loss is a part of what is quite possibly their final gambit that might just save the world. In order to predict the Tacit outbreaks, the supercomputer has been using what is essentially the digitized souls of those who died in the original beginning of the Lament, who have been trapped in a black hole known as the Necrostar. Together with the Shorekeeper, you enter the Necrostar in order to purge the corrupted data threatening the Tethys system, and in so doing, get to witness a glimpse of the past and its destruction at the hands of the Lament. This entire sequence was quite honestly breathtaking. In order to save the Tethys system and those who rely on it to avoid the ever-present dangers of this fallen world, the Shorekeeper prepares to sacrifice herself so that she can serve as the core of the Tethys system instead of the Necrostar, something that doesn't quite sit right with the rover. The sequence leading up to her rescue brings up questions of morality, such as the Tethys system putting forth the rather logical argument that the suffering and willing sacrifice of the Shorekeeper is a necessary evil to save all those who would otherwise perish without the Tethys predictions. Honestly, part of me wishes the game had started off with writing this good instead of taking 5 months to get to this point. That's not to say that it's perfect. The Shorekeeper is quite heavily pushed as a sort of canon waifu, which might have been endearing weren't it for the beginning of the quest undermining that by having Yang Yang show obvious signs that they have feelings for the rover too. Or, you know, Jinchi, or Changli, or Camilla. You get the idea. I'm gonna save you some time and just say that if you've played Genshin Impact, then you'll already be familiar with the progression and general formula Wuthering Waves follows.
I caught a preview of Wuthering Waves at GDC this year. We sat down in a booth, slathered with anime babes, and literally the first words out of the PR dude's mouth were, "It's not the same as Genshin Impact."
You serious?
Unlike other Genshin clones, however, Wuthering Waves stands out by doing something the clones didn't. Have actually good exploration. It has the same sense of flow to it that Genshin has. And while it may not have anything truly genre-altering in terms of exploration mechanics or open-world puzzles, it manages to get the most important part right: being actually fun. WuWa's exploration, rather than feeling like a chore, is something I find enjoyable. even if I haven't logged in the hours to finish it all yet. What really helps this are two critical mechanics that help WuWa stand out from Genshin: the movement and the monster collecting. Let's talk about the monster collecting first, since it's a lot quicker to explain. When you fight mobs in the open world, they have a chance to become capturable after you defeat them. You go up to these golden outlines and interact with it, and your character will then get a copy that you can equip to any character. The primary Echo gives your character an active ability that you can use at any time, and the rest provides stat boosts to your character. This effectively means that your artifact grinding takes place in the open world and doesn't require stamina, which is quite nice compared to Genshin using them as an infinite stamina sink. Sure, you can still spend stamina to get ones from a particular set and their upgrade materials, but if you're dedicated, you can reroll for better substats near indefinitely if you want. Not that you really need to, but I'll touch on that when I discuss the combat later. I will say that while it may seem that the system would allow for a lot of interesting character-monster combos, in practice it's not much more than a gimmick because there's only like 7 active abilities worth using in the entire game. And of those, Inferno Rider and the Bell rule supreme as far as my opinion goes. It's not like I was expecting the funny Disco Turtle to be endgame viable, but I also can't help but feel like there's a lot of missed potential with this system. As for the game's movement, it's really good. Sprinting doesn't consume stamina outside of combat, every character can wall run, and additionally you get a double jump and a grapple hook to boot. All of this makes traversing the terrain buttery smooth. Even better than Tower Fantasy in my opinion. Even small ledges at the top of walls aren't an issue. Since stamina does ultimately limit how high you can go vertically, this means exploration isn't completely trivialized by the wall running, which removes the tedium of vertical traversal without completely removing the challenge. Of course, the movement and monster collecting aren't the only ways WuWa differentiates itself from its competition, and for that, we'll finally have to dig into. By far, I think the thing you'll hear most about this game is how good the combat is. While I certainly think it is better than Genshin's, I also think people are a bit too heavy with praising it, because I'm gonna be real with you, it may be good, but it's not that good. The combat here is far more action-oriented with skill-based elements, with a heavy emphasis placed on dodging or parrying enemy attacks, either for survival or to open up a damage vulnerability window. The sound effects for dodges and parries, especially when you break an enemy's poise, are extremely satisfying. The rest of the combat mechanics are basically a streamlined version of Honkai Impact's combat, with there being 3 characters on a team, and skills that fire off if you swap to characters at the right moment, etc. Notably, there are very few characters in the game, at least at the time of writing, who are truly bad, which is quite commendable for a gacha game. While every character is usable and even strong in the hands of skilled players, there are definitely busted must-pull characters as well. You will pull for the AI avatar waifu whose body is made out of wormholes, and you will be happy about it. A lot of people praise WuWa for having challenging combat, which I suppose might be true until you pull Changli and invalidate all difficulty. Seriously, y'all have not played Fury, and it shows. So no, I do not consider WuWa to be a particularly challenging game, but it certainly has enough bite to keep things interesting. Another way WuWa has stood out against its contemporaries is being noticeably more generous with its premium rewards. The game gives all new players 2 standard 5-star characters, one of which is of your choosing, a standard 5-star weapon of choice upon reaching rank 45, and the banners are generally better than Genshin's, especially the weapon banner, which just gives you the weapon you want if you pull a 5-star instead of any 50-50 or 75-25 nonsense. There was also the aforementioned free limited 5-star character who's actually good, and more broadly, the devs are willing to improve the game based on player feedback and reward those who stuck with the game. You wanna know how I know this? Unlike basically every other gacha game I've played for this channel, for WuWa I've managed to remain 100% free to play. Admittedly, part of this was because over the past 6 months, I have entered my Aventurine arc and become insanely lucky with my gacha pulls. But also the game has supplied me with enough currency to get all the characters that I've been interested in thus far. Anyways, there's a reason why this YouTube thumbnail has become a meme in the community. All of that having been said, however, I don't think I'll be abandoning Genshin anytime soon. If anything, WuWa's greatest achievement was forcing Genshin out of complacency. I'll discuss it more in depth in my upcoming Genshin follow-up review, but let's just say that Hoyo finally realized it had competition because of WuWa. The harsh reality is, in its current state, I don't think WuWa is fully competitive with Genshin. I mean, how could it? Genshin has had a 4-year head start, and WuWa just does not have enough content to match the colossal amount of stuff that Genshin has to offer. I've seen others comment online that a more fair comparison would be to compare where WuWa is now to where Genshin was around the same time in its lifespan. And while yes, WuWa is certainly better off in that regard, I do think there's a logical flaw in this argument. Because WuWa isn't competing with Genshin at launch. It's competing with Genshin now. Is it fair to expect the WuWa devs to pump out content until it has the same amount as Genshin? No. But the truth is, I personally don't think that WuWa does quite enough to stand out from Genshin. It copied Hoyo's homework too closely. And I think that going forward, WuWa needs to start forging its own identity if it's going to get out of Genshin's massive shadow. So no, Wuthering Waves is not a Genshin killer, but the engaging combat loop and fluid movement mechanics certainly do make it a killer. For me personally, it made WuWa the perfect Tower of Fantasy replacement. For those of you who may not know, I have somewhat of a history with Tower of Fantasy, and after playing it for well over 500 hours, I quit. You can watch my video on the subject if you want to know the specifics, but the thing is, I was fully expecting to be hooked back in when the ToF 4.0 update dropped. A return to sci-fi, a new free Lyn skin, and several hundred free event roles. The new map has hacking-themed mechanics. I seriously expected to be hooked back into my most toxic gaming relationship, but instead, I found myself increasingly disillusioned with Tower Fantasy. And so, I uninstalled it. This time, for good. Tower of Fantasy is dead. Long live Wuthering Waves.
This is the